and we are going to be talking about housing issues. We're also going to be going over the facts and the figures in our own in our home communities to talk about the challenges, so we can set priorities for the metro area on what we should be working on. And that's going to be cross-referenced with the results of the other 8 listening tours to set the priorities for the state. The number one priority is always going to be, until it is achieved, getting a dedicated revenue source for our housing trust fund. That's something that we're still working on, and it's still a huge challenge. And it's something that we will remain a priority until a number one priority until it's addressed. The other 9 slots are up for grabs, and New Orleans will add its voice to the other 8 regions, the total 9 regions, to set those priorities. This is the second listening tour of 2023. We started this past weekend in Monroe, and we have 3 more this week. Tomorrow night is the North Shore. Wednesday night is Lafayette, and then Thursday night is Lake Charles. So we will have knocked out 5 this week, with 4 more to go. Those other regions are the Houma Thibodeau area, Baton Rouge, Alexandria, Shreveport, and I'm missing one. That's Alexandria?
He said
I did Lafayette, so Alexandria, Baton Rouge, Shreveport, and Houma Thibodeau. That's one. I counted wrong. So tonight's agenda, I'm gonna go over it and just so I can remember it. We're going to go over the fact sheet first. So look at the issues in the region, not just in the city of New Orleans or Orleans Parish, but in the region. Then we're also going to talk to you about that data set, get your reactions. What does it tell you? You have here the 2022 housing policy priorities that were set in last year's listening tour. This is a point of reference. We can start all over again, come up with new ideas, but we do want you to take a look at this. And then we also want to let you know about a project that is going to go out in the survey afterwards. So once we hear from you all and everybody online about what the priorities are for housing in this area, you all are going to get a survey so that you can rank the issue. So today, you don't have to worry about advocating for your issue to be number 1. You just need to talk about what you want to talk about and how you want to work on this. And then you're going to get a survey afterwards. That's also going to include a survey from our partners at the City of New Orleans around the CLEAP program, the Communities Local Energy Action Program pilot that's taking off here in New Orleans. That is to design microgrids. When we talk about when storms happen and when it's just a Tuesday and the lights go out, or like it happened last Monday, 9,000 people without power in New Orleans Monday morning because it was Monday. And so what kind of investments can we be making to create these microgrids that will protect folks, particularly people who are vulnerable and really dependent upon electricity for everything from keeping insulin cold to breathing machines to air conditioning, right? And what that looks like. So the survey is going to be available only to Orleans Parish residents, and it's going to be a part of the whole survey package, but we wanted to talk to you all about it tonight. It's in the packet here. We're going to go over it a little bit, and then Brandon's going to come up and talk about the power of organizing. One of the things that happens whenever we talk about this data is people want to know what we can do. Why are we setting these priorities? Because we intend to work on them and have been working on them very diligently for a number of years. One of the challenges that we have is that housing, unfortunately, is not considered a priority by our leaders. In the state of Louisiana, who wants to guess how much money we spend in the state of Louisiana of our own money on housing? How much of our multi-billion-dollar budget does the state of Louisiana spend of its own revenue on housing? Who wants to guess? Henry? Hi, Henry, you want to introduce yourself and guess? Or you just... Hello, Henry? Nope, nothing's in the Q&A. I mean, nothing new. Okay, well, you can put Henry back on mute. You can mute him. Henry, if you want to come off mute, you can, but we want you to come off mute and speak. Same thing for the phone number, because that way. And yeah, oh wait, Henry's gonna speak. Hello. We're waiting with bated breath, Henry. Literally. I'm gonna take a deep sigh so you can hear the bated breath. Okay, all right, the joke from landing flat. Henry, if you can talk, let us know. Unmute yourself and you can talk.
But not enough. They're not spending enough, right? A little bit.
How much though?
Like $10 billion?
10 million?
10 billion?
10 billion?
1%.
1%?
The least amount that we take is 10%.
Okay, anybody else? Anybody on the screen? Not Nicole, because she knows the answer. Anybody else? It's a real easy number. It's 0.
That's the middle.
There was a lower number. It's like the Price is Right. Like you should have said 1,000.
Yeah.
Raymond, you heard us talk about this before, so you knew the number. You knew the answer too. Right? No, you didn't know that. So now, not that the state doesn't have housing programs that they invest in, those programs are funded 100% by federal dollars that are allocated through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and allocated to the state through the Louisiana Housing Corporation or the Office of Community Development Disaster Recovery Unit. And it can't be used really for anything other than housing, except some of the money that they do manage to use for things other than housing, like the Community Development Block Grant funds that the state get. Most of that money that could be used for housing, they use it almost 100% for infrastructure. So the only housing money that they use is housing money given to them expressly for the purpose of housing that they cannot use for anything else. Even the millions that they're given annually in flexible dollars that could be used for housing and other things, they choose to invest in those other things. So we are not spending any of our own money on housing. That's how low the priority is in the state of Louisiana. And this has led to, and the reason for that is because people fundamentally don't understand what it means to secure affordable housing and what the definition of affordable housing is. People tend to just think about subsidized housing programs like Section 8 and public housing. And they look at those programs with scorn. And so that causes them to think, well, no, I don't want to give any of my tax dollars to those people who just need to go get jobs and need to work. And that's where this data comes in, because we want to make sure that people understand what we're talking about when we talk about housing insecurity, when we talk about the housing crisis. So again, we've got the 7 parishes that make up the Greater New Orleans Housing Alliance area: Jefferson, Orleans, Plaquemine, St. John the Baptist, St. Bernard, St. Charles, and St. James. And you'll see across those different parishes a number of different data sets, like the number of people who live there. Jefferson is actually the most populous parish in the area. New Orleans has still yet to recover from the Hurricane Katrina, which was going to be 18 years ago this year. And so we're still down over 100,000, mostly African Americans. And you're going to see why in a minute when you look at these numbers. When first up, let's look at the numbers yes, thank you very much. So y'all can follow along at home. We're on page 2 and 3 inside the document. So you can see that comparing New Orleans to Jefferson, despite the fact that there are more people living in Jefferson, the median home value in Jefferson is actually lower than the median home value in Orleans by about $54,000, so not a small amount. Despite the fact that almost a quarter of the people who live in New Orleans are at or below the poverty line, our houses are more expensive. And that's why, when you look down at the bottom and you see the overall cost burden, the housing cost burden, to determine whether or not someone's living in housing that's affordable, it's a very simple calculation. It is whether or not you're spending less than 30% of your gross income on your total housing cost. So if you make $1,000 a month, you should not be spending more than $300 a month on your total housing cost. That's your rent and utility. If you're renting, that's your mortgage and utilities if you're a homeowner. And so you can automatically see how somebody who's only earning or bringing in $1,000 a month will struggle, right? Because who can find an apartment for $300, including utilities? But that number is also a challenge for somebody who's making $1,000, $1,000 every 2 weeks, right? That's $24,000. Okay, that's $600. That's still not out there. So let's triple it. Let's go to $3,000 a month and make it $36,000. Surely you can afford that. So that would be you could be spending $1,000 a month just for yourself. How easy is it to find an apartment in the city of New Orleans for $1,000 a month, including your utilities? Just for one person. It's a one that is a little better, but it's still hard. It's still hard. And then, again, we're talking about your gross income, right? Nobody takes on their, I mean, if you take on, even if you take on, you still have to pay taxes on it. So you gotta still do that and then have money left over for other things. And then you look at the median rent in Orleans Parish. The median rent is $1,079. That's just rent. That does not include utilities. Median rent in Jefferson, $1,026. Clackamas Parish, median rent is $1,377. St. John the Baptist, $947. St. Bernard, $959. St. Charles, almost $1,100. St. James is the winner with $686 per month. And then when you look at the number of renters in that community, there are not a lot of renters in that community. And Brandon, I think there's a typo on these numbers. We gotta double check these because the percentages don't. Yeah. We gotta check with Romy on that.
Okay.
No, saying 82% owner occupied and 98% renter occupied. That's not right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the owner occupied numbers are the ones that are right, and the renter occupied number is the one that's wrong. So like Orleans, 48% of the community is owners or homeowners, compared to every other area where overwhelmingly, like St. James Parish, where you have the really low rent, only about 18% of the people who live out there rent. And St. Charles, St. Bernard, St. John the Baptist, they all have. Jefferson Parish is the closest to New Orleans with 62%, but that's still a majority homeowner community. And
that's a big deal because it's over the threshold. So more than half of the people own their home.
yeah. And and again, home ownership is a way to build wealth. It's a way to build security, but not everybody is ready for homeownership. Not everyone wants to be a homeowner. Not everyone can be a homeowner. And so while you do want to encourage people to build, particularly generational wealth, you still want to make it so that people can have somewhere to stay. So we're not going to go over the whole chart with you all. We want you to look at this and ask you some questions and really have you talk about it. One thing that we want to make sure everybody is also looking at is on page, flip. So the page numbers are, if you flip to the energy efficiency data page, there we go. The monthly energy costs across the parishes. So Jefferson, $145 a month. Orleans, $172 a month. Clackamas, $163. St. John the Baptist, $176 per month on the average energy cost, monthly energy cost. So again, you add, those are just the averages, right? If you're living in a home that is less energy efficient, the number's gonna be much higher. But putting these numbers together with the mortgage cost and with the rent cost, that gives you a picture of what people are facing as they live in those communities. And we've been collecting this data for a couple of years now. The damage done, and it's not just from hurricane from 2021, it's also last year's hurricane damage. So we've got the damage estimates from Laura, Ida, Zeta, Delta. And so this is in the millions of dollars. So you'll see the number of damaged homes in Jefferson and Orleans, parish by parish, is significant, and how much money is necessary based on the category of damage. You see only 86,000 homes have been damaged. In Orleans, only 105,000 have been damaged. In Jefferson, and the costs are fairly modest. I don't know if you can zoom in, Marisa, so folks online can see. Yeah, there we go.
That's what you wanted to see?
Oh, no, yeah, actually, go back and do what you just did and zoom in. But,
Hurricane damage?
scroll. Where's the, yes. And zoom in even more.
To the hurricane damage?
Yep. Zooms more. Yeah, there we go. So, so y'all can see online, you're talking about numbers in the billions, the damages in the billions, but that's not a lot of money when you think about the fact that you're talking about 200,000 homes. $2 billion, almost $2.5 billion is not a lot of money for 200,000 homes. That means that the damage is relatively minor, but it still needs to be repaired. You look at the damage in St. John the Baptist, however, and you can tell where this hurricane hit. 15,000 homes, and the damage is almost $500 million. So you've got more significant damage, more funding is necessary. But again, Orleans and Jefferson are not, should not be ignored. Another guessing game, who wants to guess how much money has been allocated for Hurricane Ida so far from the federal government to repair damages?
$2 million.
Okay. Anybody else? $3 million. Well, technically, again, answer's the same. Technically, for this area, it's 0. So we have still not seen a Hurricane Ida appropriation for these communities to address the hurricane issues from the federal government. So we are still quite behind on that. If we were in Lake Charles or Lafayette, we'd be looking at different numbers, and we'd be talking about the fact that there was a couple billion allocated for those communities for Laura and Delta, which were hurricanes that happened in 2021. So, and they only got a couple $2 billion, and their numbers exceed that. All total, when you put in all of the damage that we've estimated across the state over the various hurricanes, it's about $15 billion that we need in the state to address all of these. And so far, we've only gotten $2 billion. So we're quite a ways away off, and we need some more resources quickly from the federal government so that these folks can get help rebuilding their homes and rebuilding their lives. So that is the data that we wanted to take you all through it. We also want to give you a chance to ask any questions, and to there's different ways of drilling down on some of this data that we can go over with you all, but we also want to hear you talk about what this data means to you hearing this, and what questions you might have, especially as we're going to roll right into setting the priority for the metro area. So online, if you want to raise your hand because you are a panelist, you should be able to do that. And then in the room. Raymond? No, anything? Oh, I thought you were, thought you were.
Picking on me.
Nobody? Okay, anybody online? Henry's got a hand raised. All right, Henry, on mute. No, it's coming, it should come through the owl.
Henry, if you go ahead.
Can you unmute? Hit him again. Okay, let's, there, maybe that'll work. Henry, if you can type, maybe you can go to the Q&A. And we heard Nicole, can you come up just so we can make sure and confirm that y'all can in fact speak again? Nicole, can you unmute?
Yes,
Here y'all.
yes, we can speak.
Y'all can hear us, okay. Thank you both for that. Henry, if you can go into the Q&A section and type something.
The volume is lower now.
I moved away from the thing, so that's.
Oh,
why.
no, okay, all right.
I was, I can project, but I was quite a ways away.
I think Henry was late when you sent over that link to make us be a panelist. So he didn't get to make himself a panelist where he could unmute. So I think that's the issue with him.
Try it again, try to promote him again. All right, Henry, can you, he looks like he's been promoted.
He would have moved over here.
Yeah, he would have moved, so it's.
May I speak?
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me? Nope. Oh, joining the panel.
You helped. You made it possible for him to speak.
Oh, he just moved up. Henry?
He just muted.
Okay, so is that a yes?
Can hear you.
Okay, oh, okay.
Thank you
Yeah.
for the discussion. I think the transit-oriented development with like the streetcar and buses go into areas that are like kind of cut off from the central business district, where majority of jobs goes to.
Maybe.
So like connecting
And you need to
neighborhoods
turn on the
like
volume.
St. Rock in Florida with the streetcar,
No.
that will bring in more workers into.
Like, I don't know if it's on the federal level with taxes, but basically if you make $600 and you have to file and then you have to pay taxes with an employer. So really like the poor are taxed a ton just from receiving just a little bit of income,
Right.
where like they work at a place for a month and they're getting taxed. Really, like, I mean, that could be increased to like 6 months. They have to be there making income for 6 months before they have to file. And, that way they're kind of incentivized to stay because they don't have to do all the paperwork and, they can just start somewhere, where they can build it, they can just start and build those skills just by doing,
So you're
applying.
talking about like apprenticeship programs,
Yeah.
making sure that folks are not taxed at typical rates while they're in those entry level positions.
Yeah.
Give them the chance to build to build a career.
Yeah.
And then moving forward and then also combining that with making sure that there's transit opportunities to connect places where people can afford to live with the jobs that they have.
Yeah.
Okay.
And can bring, income to those areas, and they can better take care of their homes and things like that. And the property value will go up because of that. And then there'll be more interest because of the appreciation. And on the other side, like there's tons of land that is not used, like in Florida and the Desire neighborhood. If like there was transit that went there, like say went down Franklin or Alamaster, then those would be connected to the commerce of the city, and they can build a schedule around that, and it's they can, it just makes it easier to find work.
But we still need to make that catalytic investment.
Yeah.
So
There's
again,
tons of obstacles.
yes, but you got to break all of them down.
Yeah.
People want to live in those areas. That's home for a lot of those folks.
Yeah.
They've been
It's
pushed
the-
out of those
That's New
communities.
Orleans. It's still New Orleans.
Yeah.
And
What you said about it being taxed different though, I think that's pretty cool because if we have, like you said, so many people in the housing program or the subsidy program, they already qualify, right? So it would be having those people or those like property managements maybe put in the tax differently, right? Or those people will have different forms because when I go to apply, I'm already in a different tax bracket. So either between the people who are working with Hano as the property managers, give those taxes out to people kinda, or like a notice, like you could have a parking pass, it would be a tax. And that should be back to the federal government because it's like you said, goes to Hano and that's all federal money.
there's just like a very low inventory of like housing that accepts vouchers. I don't really think landlords are incentivized to accept it through the taxing system.
In the ones that,
Well, the other
question.
So one of the things that we want to hear everybody's opinion, but we also want to make sure that you don't walk out of here with misinformation. And so one thing that we have to talk about is the incentive to be on the Section 8 program is that you get your rent is guaranteed, much
Exactly.
like, so we have to talk about what biases and prejudices people have that's getting in the way of especially after COVID. Anybody who's been a landlord during COVID, no matter who you rented to, you have problems, right? You could be a short-term rental operator charging $1,000 a night for your luxury piece, and you weren't getting that money during COVID because nobody was coming here. Hoteliers, same issue. Condos, people lost their jobs in jobs that they never thought they would lose their jobs. And then you got everybody else inside of that who could not pay their rent. And so landlords experienced the challenges that a lot of their tenants face, right? That income insecurity. And so we need folks to be thinking about this, bringing some more business to it, because the fact that they think that they don't have incentives is frankly, their bias talking, right? We often hear from people that they would rather be a short-term rental operator rather than dealing with the kinds of tenants who would use a subsidy program like Section 8 because they're gonna tear up their unit. And my counter to that always is, so you do realize that it's a short-term rental operator, you are hosting people who come to New Orleans for things like Mardi Gras and bowl games.
They're bandwagon though, because we just watched them do that with the 75 units, right? Remember those were supposed to be for
No,
low income,
people have been doing that forever. They're not jumping on bandwagons.
but they're helping the other side. They're like, well, we'll make more money too, or we'll do this too.
Right, the people who, again, people
But
they're not
I'm saying
doing the
that
math.
because the federal government isn't giving us any money anyway. So if
Well, no,
they're not doing it,
no,
then why would
that-
people
The
forget it?
federal government isn't doing as much as they could. We have 1,000 vouchers that are going unused every day. And we have a vacancy rate in the city where there are about 17,000 empty apartments that are occupiable every day. So there are people making choices and they're leaving money on the table
Yeah, I agree.
because of their prejudices.
That prejudice isn't going to help us in the future. That's the same same conversation I'm having with the $0 to help us build housing. So yeah, this sounds cool like right now, but y'all not helping nobody. You're not helping yourself.
But they don't care. They think,
But they
Yep.
do care because they're not getting the money. That's
Yep.
what you said, the landlords are having income
but
insecurity.
then
The only
it's not
way-
turning into logical business decisions where let me go find someone who can guarantee me payment.
So to disarm them, they're already kind of not in a good spot because they're now like us, your income insecurity. But to arm you is to say, well, you'll put people in the place so that people have housing. That's like a win-win.
It
Right?
should be, but it's not working that way. Part of the reason it's not working that way is because our elected officials aren't doing what's necessary to push folks, right? In addition to, we also need to be talking about some disincentives for leaving a property vacant. In other places, you pay a vacancy tax. If you leave a property that's occupiable vacant, what are you doing? Like, something's going on. If you can choose to do that, then you can pay this penalty because you're keeping housing out of the market, especially as it's becoming revealed more and more that a lot of that, those people keeping housing off the market are participating in a price fixing scheme to keep the prices higher on parts of their inventory to rent it to more wealthy people. They're creating a false supply, a false sense of supply and demand. There was just a story this weekend. This is something that's happened in New York City, where people often think of when New York has people always trying to get in New York, and there's just never enough room, right? But because of COVID, a lot of people have left cities like New York, and that's borne out. The census, the state of New York actually lost a congressional seat because of a population shift that was tied to COVID. So there are less people living in New York City and New York State than there were 10 years ago. So, and there's been some investigation that has shown that there are real estate concerns that are manipulating the market by holding properties that they could make money on, but they figured out how to make even more money by keeping these properties vacant and artificially inflating other parts of their own inventory. And so that kind of thing that we've got to talk about, to your point, we've got to figure out what it is that they're getting out of not getting money. For some of them, it's just the satisfaction of being a bigot. For some of them, there's actually some other money that they're making. There's other resources that they're tapping into. And this is where our government comes in, because they've got to regulate, right? We can't regulate hearts and minds. Tasia, to your point, we can educate people about their bigotry and things like that. But for people for whom there is a financial incentive, our government has to step in and really disincentivize it.
I think you said other cities do the vacancy tax?
Yep.
I think that's a great idea.
Okay, I do have a question.
vacancies.
What would we people, residents on the ground kind of be doing when you say the government has to step in to kind of push these policies? So are we kind of like, hey, we need new policies? That's how that works?
Yes, so I'll get my spiel. Hello, everyone. My name is Brandon Caples. I am the statewide organizer with Housing Louisiana. And Tasia gave me a great quarterback, right? Threw a great ball to me, okay? So we know what it's like when people don't do anything, when your voice is not heard, right? And what I want to do with you guys in the room and also on Zoom, and Roland is passing some slips out in the room, is I want to build power with you guys so that we can hold our elected officials accountable, but also not just them, but hold ourselves accountable as well, right? We know exactly what happens when we don't do anything, right? Nothing gets done. And then when we try to fight unorganized, nothing still gets done. So I am starting, along with Housing Louisiana, a resident organizing chapter in New Orleans. It's going to be 9 across the state, which is the regions that Anjanika outlined before. And I want to start this chapter so that we can build power within our community to hold these people accountable, show up in spaces where they think that residents are not going to show up to, and then disrupt the system. That's exactly what we have to do. in order to, I'm sorry, I'm in your camera, but and that's what we have to do in order to invoke change, in order to create change, and in order to get them to do what we want them to do in our communities. Because like we said, like Angelina just said, it's a lot of untapped resources, and we have to find out what incentives are they getting if they're not doing these things, right? And it's very clear what we see across the state and across this country. This housing crisis is not an issue just in the state of Louisiana, it's across the country. We are seeing this across the state in Oregon, we're seeing it in New Mexico, we are seeing it in Ohio, Detroit, where more and more people, as the rent is increasing, more and more people are being pushed out. So it's important for us, just as advocates, to build that power where we can move and mobilize ourselves as people to create change. So I got a few people that's coming in late, so what I want to do is, you guys, I have everyone on Zoom. I have all of your contact information. In March, I'll be starting. We'll be having our first chapter meeting for ROLA, which stands for Residents Organized in Louisiana. Residents Organizing for Housing in Louisiana. I'm sorry. And I want us to come up and look at these problems. So Angelina is going to go briefly over these housing priorities, which may have changed for some of you guys, or may have not changed for some of you. But
So I mean, you're starting to hear some of their priorities.
yeah.
Folks are just reading.
Yeah. And then I'll take those notes, and then in March, you'll get another email from me when you fill out that slip, and we'll convene hybrid in a location, but that date is pending. But I want to build that power with you all because it's super important. And we see it just as locals, we see it with our transportation, like you said, we see it across the board. This is not, as we think about putting housing first, that little card that y'all picked up in the beginning, we think these issues can all be resolved if people put housing first. But that doesn't happen. And we see what happens when people doesn't put housing first for a lot of people. We saw that with the pandemic. We're seeing it with the job insecurity across the state. And now we're seeing it with our workforce and our housing inventory.
And this is super important because you're saying that the policy that we're doing here, and it's not a coalition or union necessarily, but
That's correct.
this is across the board.
And this is resident led, right? So we're talking about residents doing this work. We're not talking about housing professionals. Prior to this job, I wasn't a housing professional. I know about housing policy and different things like that. But we'll learn all that stuff together. We, just like Angelina said, we don't want to spread misinformation. We want to give you the tools that you guys need to build that power within your community. Because so often they bet on you not knowing. And because if you don't know, they expect you to not show up. But we're going to get those tools together, and we're going to make sure. Yep.
The half measures and false solutions that they offer.
Yep.
Right? They'll say, oh, I will pass a policy, I will pass a law, I will introduce a program, and I will tell you that it's going to help you. And then it doesn't. And we have more laws. Right. And then they say, oh, well, so you might be doing something wrong, or all these different things. A really good example of that is what's been happening with short-term rental policy. I personally think that the short-term rental fight has been a very large distraction, and that being against short-term rentals does not mean that you are automatically in favor of affordable housing. You gotta be in favor of affordable housing, not just against short-term rentals, because you have a lot of people advocating for short-term rentals just not to be in their neighborhood, and they could care less whether or not about the almost half of the people who live in New Orleans who can't afford to live here. They don't care. And so that needs, but yet still, this is an issue when you ask elected officials. A lot of them say, hey, we care about affordable housing, and I'm gonna fight about short-term rentals. And we have in the last 7 years, no, 6 years, sorry, it is 7 years. The last 7 years had 3 different 2-year policy actions at the behest of the administration and the council over 2 mayors and 3 separate councils. They have taken up the cause of short-term rentals 3 different occasions and spent anywhere from a year to 24 months on it. They're now on their 4th iteration of this. And at a certain point, you got to say, you can't be this bad at this, except on purpose, right? Because like, what are you doing? Why isn't this working? Why? Meanwhile, you know, short-term rentals have gone up, gone down in the pandemic. When short-term rentals were at their all-time low during the pandemic, evictions for Black women and their children who rent went through the roof. So we can prove that short-term rentals are not the only cause for housing insecurity. And we can show that there is a way that they can actually be helpful if they are properly regulated. And what's happening with short-term rentals is that they're not being properly regulated, and they are a big distraction from bigger issues. Because at the same time, the council and the administration were not talking about rental quality, despite the fact that people died as a result of their housing situation over that same period of time. So we've got to get them, and that's what the roller chapter is going to do, is talk about the real issues and really help push through the noise that our policymakers like to rely on. And again, to Brandon's point, they expect you all not to show up, and they expect you to be confused. Morgan can introduce herself. She's been a big fighter with us for a while, and she can tell you exactly how that works.
I'm Morgan Clevenger. I'm a longtime advocate. I'm from New Orleans. I've seen every iteration of everything, destruction of neighborhoods like Treme, personally being displaced from various parts of the city, but also understanding that after 40 years as a renter, and my mother took for her 40 years, we finally became homeowners. But what we understand here is that any conversation about affordable housing is also got to include affordable home ownership, because what we've seen, New Orleans is one of the diverse cities ever to be in America. And there's always been a huge history, 300-year history of people of color owning property in the city and working people owning property in the city. And as we've seen, particularly post-Katrina, a constant erosion of that ability to own a home. Right now, well, in 2019, I'll go back a little further. We worked hard in our neighborhood, which is predominantly working class and Black homeowners, to get the crime out. We knew it was going to be a gentrification flip. That's why they let the crime just fester and grow. But we stood up to it and we got it out ourselves. It took us 10 years. So we kept our people in. And then in 2019, the assessor decided, oh, well, y'all did such a good job. We're going to jack your assessments up to 700%, which of course is another way to push people out of their homes. So we started that fight, and we went to Andronika and various other agencies to help us in that fight. We did a big meeting at Corpus Christi Church with 400 people from around the city and the assessor. And what we learned, we did a lot of research. We learned a couple of really interesting things about the assessor's office. And that is, most of what he's doing is not law, it's policy. And he gets to make that up. He has no oversight. There's the mayor, he doesn't answer to the mayor or the council. He said he answers to the people, the voters of New Orleans. But he does not put those policies before the people to vote upon. He decides those within his own realm. The other interesting thing is that his revenue for his office, how he gets paid, his people get paid, and how he runs that office is tied directly to the percentage of revenue he brings in according to assessments. So, hey, you know, but we have
a huge surplus.
That's right. And nobody ever,
Each property is different too.
yeah, and nobody ever talks about that.
The income and the value, those are two different things.
Two different things. And one of the biggest things about, yes, ma'am.
When they made this job, they orchestrated it that way, or did it become like that over
At
the
one
years?
time, we had 7 assessors in Orleans Parish. And it was all who you know, what you know, go have coffee with your assessor and get your assessment drawn
Buy
down. Yeah. And then in
Buy
the
a
name,
fundraiser, buy a ticket to his
Right.
fundraiser.
in the name of reform, a few years ago, we went to the one assessor. Okay, but that has its own issues.
But Tasia, to your point though, and that's the question you're asking, it has always been designed that way with the lack of accountability that that person has until the only accountability point is 2 inflection points, a recall, or if they choose to run for reelection. That's it.
There's no oversight, and again, so.
Well, but the city council, there are some checks. There's the city council and the Louisiana Tax Commission that said there are opportunities for some checks and balances, but those processes are very deliberately kept confusing. Like a few years ago when Morgan started working with us on this, we were having meetings with the city council members. They were hosting meetings, not telling us that they were the board of review who actually had to approve the roles. And that they could, and they have a process that they oversee that's also based on relationships. You, as the owner, if you reach out to your council member and say, I have a problem with my property assessment, the city council can call the contractor that they hire and say, we want you to look at this, right? And change this one property if they find something wrong. But that's a process that people need to know about.
It's a big process, and some of the things that we uncovered was the onerous burden that the assessor's office puts on the citizen. And he literally states in all of his material, it's up to the citizen to prove to me why my assessment is wrong. And he lists a number of documents that you could bring in to supplicate and say, hey, can you lower this? But if you don't have access to hire an attorney or an appraiser or another professional, or you don't have another way, you're literally at the mercy. And so what we did was we put on workshops. We served about almost 700 people and taught them how to do an appeal without having to hire somebody. But what happens there is, again, you go as a supplicant. And what we saw, because we escorted people into these meetings, that very often, in most cases, they were told, well, we can reduce you by 10%. That's it. You know, so it was really, the burden is on the citizen to prove this. But even more important is 60% of the parcels in Orleans Parish do not pay property tax. The burden is on the homeowner. Now, when values rise and he uses the mass market appraisal system. So Miss Etta, who's been on the corner for 50 years, and Mr. Steve, who just got here and bought a house for $500,000, he's assessing Miss Etta and Mr. Steve the same way. Mm-hmm. And he's telling Miss Etta, you got to prove to me that your house is not worth $500,000. And a lot of times in this city, you will see properties in great neighborhoods that look like hell from the outside because they can't go inside. So people do that. They leave their properties in bad condition to try to keep their assessment lower. But we also know that property tax assessments, insurance, energy, utilities is driving people out of their homes. And one of the things that's really been a long time tradition in New Orleans is that owning of a double, where grandma has the double, it's been in the family forever, and relatives live next door. But because of those rising costs, what we saw in the pandemic was all those young relatives who had hospitality jobs lost their jobs. And so all of a sudden, grandma can't pay the bills. And then Ida came, the most underassessed and underaddressed hurricane we've ever had in the city. And I'll give an example. My neighbor across the street, Miss Alma, took her roof, destroyed the income producing side of the double. She still has a blue tar for a year and a half later and nothing is repaired. So she's lost that income and she will lose that home if we don't do something. So I could talk on this forever.
I would love to connect with her. So thank you. Thank you for that history.
You know, I came here, I walked in on this building 3 times trying to get in. I've been trying to find out. But
Why did you call me?
I was about to drive away, but then I finally saw a buzzer. But here's the thing, you know why I'm here. You know this is something that is super important to me because as cities go and as our environment goes, we have to have housing. It's a right. And so if we're on the one hand pushing people out through all these mechanisms, and short-term rentals has various nuances they're not even talking about. And we brought 60 low-income working class homeowners to a CPC meeting a couple of weeks ago where they said, oh, you don't need to go, you don't need to go. Well, that's when you need to go. When they say don't go, go. So what those folks testified to, and I'll never forget, one of my neighbors, Miss Washington, she's 83 years old. She lives in Tremeg, and she said, this is the only way I can keep my home. This one asset that I have. And, you know, so there's a lot of nuance to this, but it's all sort of a lot of forces in the city working. Commercial wants to get rid of residential. French Quarter, Marigny, Lower Garden District, they all say, oh, we want to keep our ban. Let's ban everything everywhere. Hey man, it may not work that way in every neighborhood. So there's a lot going on. And but I am running for state legislative representative. Yeah, you didn't know that. Yeah, no, it's 93. It's Royce's seat. Okay, yes, it's a very quick, fast election. Early voting starts Saturday, and the election day is February 18th, and Demi and Nantucket Saturday. So it's all about early voting. And I'm not here to promote myself. I'm really here because Andronika knows how big of an issue this is to me. And when I saw that thing, it said legislative priorities. I'm in. What, you know, I know mostly about what you guys are trying to do. So as that legislator, I want to make sure, because we know right now there are people living 10, 15, 18 to a home. We know this. I know people that are living like that, and it's not safe. The other thing is when we talk about affordable housing from a rental standpoint, there's so much empty property in this city. There is so much empty property in this city. And it is just startling to me that we've got to say, hey, we got to build another 30-unit building boxes. We don't have to do that.
We do have to build more, but we have to bring online the ones that we have.
All right, I want to.
Sorry.
No, thank you. You gave us a good history. We did get a comment, and I'm sorry I got the worst eyes, but it says, "I am a prime example of how do the representatives allow a 2-bedroom, 1.5 bath to jump from $975 to $1,235 with a $260 increase. I do realize that COVID has changed the world, but oh my Lord, that is a lot of increase at one time. We need to change and protect peoples that rent, and absolutely. And I would, I'm sorry I may mess up your name, but Ms. Smith, I'm gonna just say Ms. Smith, I definitely would like to work with you and advocate with you on that end. And thank you so much, Ms. Morgan, because guess what? I definitely want to work with you, and I want to get in contact with you on that. So as of right now, on the statewide organizer, I want to bring it back because I want to make sure I get my laptop because I want to hear some of these priorities. But this is Roland. Roland is our organizer in New Orleans. So you guys will be able to hear from myself. Y'all will get a follow-up email prior to this and a survey. And then you can kind of lay that out in the beginning. But you'll hear from us, and I want you guys to stay engaged, okay? Because when we do this kickoff in March, I want to make sure that it's so dynamic, and I want so many people to show up, and I want them to say New Orleans was representative, but all the cities across the state was representative. All right, so moving on. So yes, bring the priorities up. And if anybody on Zoom had anything to share, please do it now. Yes.
Exactly if this is something that we could all discuss formally, but I was thinking about this yesterday. So I have some maintenance issues at my apartment. However, they can be dealt with, they can be handled. It's just that I realized that we don't have a 24-hour maintenance team. We're not even open 24 hours, and I have to wait till 9 o'clock for someone to get in. And as we talk about these different like policies and things going on, it kind of like I had this tennis ball effect in my brain that if there was 24/7 or even 20 fix, that our residents, me included, had more access to help. I think that would be great to kind of have implemented, especially with these subsidy programs.
Is this Hannah you're talking about?
I'm in VA, so I'm at an HRI property, and it's a older, not complete senior citizen, because I'm not a senior citizen, but it's an older HRI property. But I'm in the understanding that if recently we had somebody pass away, and they found out because we had those inspections that every panel or subsidy program had to be a part of. Well, that's how they found out that that man had been passed away in that house for at least 2 or 3 days. And it made me kind of think about that tennis ball, how like maintenance coming in, or how often are people checking? Well, we don't have 24-hour staff. So she's not going to think about that, because that's her priorities are, like you're saying, these other maintenance things. But I really was thinking, how could we have more patrol? And it's not to security people, but
But it's also supportive services.
yeah,
Yeah, somebody checking on vulnerable folks,
Right.
making
The
sure
vulnerable
that,
population.
because if someone, if that's what it takes is for someone to find you, that checking for you, that means that your family may be a ways away. Friends, maybe, people have lives, so we need to make sure people have support systems.
Right.
Well, another thing, because I'm always in community and I'm always talking to people, and people always call me on like their de facto council person, representative, whatever. So I got a call a couple of days ago, and one of my neighbors, she is a single mom. Her daughter actually got accepted to college and on a scholarship, which is a pretty big deal for her and her family. But now Hannah wants to take away her voucher and reduce her bedrooms because they're saying the daughter is going off to college. But that doesn't make any sense.
She's a dependent.
because she gotta come back.
Right.
No, she's a dependent. They're not
Right.
supposed to.
Right, so that they're reducing her voucher to 1 bedroom. So she's gotta move now. And I find that from a policy standpoint to be counterproductive, because if we're saying we want people to thrive and succeed, and here you have this child, first child in the family to go to college, and now you're saying, well, mom can't stay in the house because.
And then where the child's gonna come home to.
Right,
for the summer.
where's the
So
child?
we lost
Two people, right, so, and there's younger children as well, but I mean, that's the kind of policy change that I think is possible.
But that's not even a policy change. That's not the rules. That's also people knowing what the rules are
Yeah.
Okay,
and having an advocate go in there and say, show us the regulation.
that's.
What Nicole Lawrence is on this call, we, Trent, those of us who work at the housing authority, this is a fairly simple, straightforward. Someone's gotta know. That's not what the regs say. That's not how that's supposed to work. We need to be able to hear Nicole, because we turned on the volume.
Okay, just for time's sake, we gotta be out here by 7:30.
Oh, okay, so we got 7 minutes left. So. Did Nicole try to? Did she-
I'm here. You guys.
Okay, so
Yeah,
on that
Trent, yeah.
note, if we had like regulators phone numbers.
You change my-
Should I give that out to people who are in Hannah?
I
Like,
don't know.
is
I
that
mean,
legal?
that's Hannah's policies.
How y'all talking about? You said that they know if I had that number and I
So,
didn't.
no, the first place they need to call is legal aid.
Okay.
Okay.
Legal aid will absolutely help, fight those kind of, that, the lawyers will come in and say, no, this is not these are the regs, this was supposed to happen. This is how it's supposed to go, and they'll step in. So that's one of the first things. And that's also something that we need to make sure that we're talking about is Help Louisiana Now and Help NOLA Now. Because we often want to send people to the folks, and legal aid will absolutely step in and help those folks.
So here's another scenario that's happened. So there's a house, a Section 8 apartment that the police recovered 32 weapons, huge amounts of drugs, all kinds of stuff. And the folks are still living there.
Well, they have to, people have rights So I misunderstood. I thought we'd be done by 7:30, so we could pack up. We actually have to be out of here
Oh,
by
okay,
7:30.
all right.
So we have 5 minutes left. I
So,
think we've
so
talked
the
about.
contrast of that is what my neighbors are talking about. Here's a mother with her child going to college and feels like she's getting.
Right, because she's done everything right. She's told everybody what's going on.
Right, and
She's
here's
letting
this
people-
other group who's got a cache of weapons and they're ripping up everybody in the neighborhood. How do they get to stay in the house?
Well,
So-
she does all proven
Right.
guilty with that one, and
Yeah.
she is essentially, she hasn't confessed, she has informed someone who doesn't know the rules. And they think that they've triggered something, whereas those folks, if they had confessed to what it is that they're doing, the housing authority would have acted
Okay,
quickly, but I promise you, they're not telling the housing authority what you all know
right,
about what's going on there. And then that's another area though where, again, community engagement, y'all need to be working with the resident councils for the housing authority, the section 8 resident councils, so that collectively y'all go to the housing authority and talk about all of these issues. So that it's not just simply neighbors coming and complaining about certain tenants.
right.
There's also people advocating for tenants who need help.
Yeah, and a lot of people do.
And that's what the organizers are going to help with.
Absolutely. So you'll be getting some emails from me.
Okay.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Let's give Angelina a round of applause. I feel it, leader. Thank you, guys.
We're gonna let people take home.
Yes, please, they have a bunch of pizza. Please go back there. Take what you
Do you
What you
have any
need?
information about how to get in touch with the house? Cause I wasn't.
yes,
Yeah, like, you fill out one of your.
yes, I
Oh, he's gonna call you.
Yeah.
He is going to call you.
will.
Well,
Thank you guys so much. I'll take some pizza.
Um,
Yeah.